Shine on Faith. That's one of my favorite songs. If you blast that in your car, everybody just gets out of your way. It's fantastic, I promise. So a movie came out about 20 years ago called Playing by Heart. I don't know if any of you saw it. It has this amazing ensemble cast of famous actors. Sean Connery's in it, Angelina Jolie, Gina Rowlands, Dennis Quaid, Jon Stewart's in it, Ellen Burstyn, on and on. Great movie. But it's interesting because you think you're watching separate storylines the whole time, and then you get to the end of the movie and you realize that all the characters were actually connected in some way. So it's really cool. But the reason I bring this movie up is because there is a line in it that gets quoted a lot that I want to share with you. Angelina Jolie's character at one point says, "Talking about love is like dancing about architecture." What? Talking about love is like dancing about architecture. The point being that you can't dance about architecture. That doesn't even make any sense. And you can't really talk about the idea of love. Love can be expressed, felt, and experienced by human beings in so many different ways that it makes describing it in words really challenging. Now, in the scene where her character says this, she also mentions that you could say the same thing about music. You know, think about all the different styles of music out there and the way they make us feel, like that song we just heard, right? Don't you just feel like you can do all things when you hear that? Music, it gives us a soundtrack for our lives and just affects our emotions so much. So talking about music is like dancing about architecture. You can't really do it. Love and music are two examples of these wide-ranging, deeply abstract subjects. And when we try to put them into words and talk about them, it can end up falling a little flat. Well, sometimes I think talking about faith is like dancing about architecture. It doesn't stop me from trying, mind you, but faith is really such an abstract thing. Could you imagine if I put you on the spot and said, "Hey, you, tell me all about your faith"? Ugh, where would you even begin, right? Some things might come out, but your words might never fully encapsulate what your faith is. It can be difficult to talk about and challenging to learn about and improve. And when you take it seriously, which I think all of us do, you want to improve and strengthen your faith. We reach the point where we understand the value in that. And that's why I have such a soft spot for CSL centers because, you know, as Lee mentioned, they are truly committed to teaching us methods and ways to strengthen our faith. So the title of today's talk is, do you have faith or are you had by faith? Huh? It almost sounds like a trick question, right? I would say faith isn't something you have or are had by. Faith is something you are. It's a way of being and a way of operating. So this goofy question of do you have faith or are you had by faith makes me think of that part in the Science of Mind where Ernest Holmes asks us to consider whether we have faith in God or whether we have the faith of God. So think about that. Do you have faith in God or do you have the faith of God? When I hear that, I just want to go, I see what you did there, right? Doesn't it just change your thinking there? And it's not a judgment of, you know, one is right and one is wrong. It's more that the goal, and it's a lofty goal, is to be full of faith, to reach a point where we are faithful at all times. And until that way of being just becomes who we are. So I think a great example of this is, let's say a woman goes to medical school and becomes a physician. I'm going to use female examples for Ruth Bader Ginsburg today. So, and this doctor is on vacation one day and she's sitting in a restaurant on vacation and a stranger on the other side of the restaurant keels over and collapses in a medical emergency. What do you think that doctor is going to do? She's going to jump up and help because that's who and what she is. She's a doctor who practices medicine and who helps people heal. Helping a sick person would come naturally to her and automatically. So faith, if we're doing it right, should come naturally, right? It's a calm assurance. Now, it moves and morphs and changes throughout our lives, and to get to that natural calm assurance takes practice, and to stay there takes a lot of effort. We're all spiritual beings having a human life experience, and we've all had times where our faith is rock solid, right? Where we're saying things like, I'm going to get through this, and I'm going to affirm good things and know the truth of this situation. And then we've probably had other times where we abandon our faith. We hit panic mode, and my gosh, I've had plenty of times where I just completely forgot I even had faith. You know, when you're sobbing on the bathroom floor and shaking your fist at the sky, that kind of stuff. Is that just me? I hope it's not just me. I think we've all been there. But we know faith is a thing of thought, right? It takes place in our mind. It's a way of thinking and expecting, whether we're thinking good thoughts, expecting good things, or we're thinking negative thoughts and having false beliefs and expecting bad things. It's two sides to the same coin, but it's all faith. So I have this visual tool that I use that I want to share with you guys. See that? Okay. So these are the scales of justice, right? Now, I don't actually look at this picture. I imagine this in my mind. I wanted to give you guys the same picture in your mind. This scale represents my thoughts and words and expectations. Now, one side represents my faith in goodness, my knowing, my trusting, my belief in the goodness of God, Spirit, universe, source, insert your word. It represents my truth. Now, the scale on the other side represents my fears, my false beliefs. It's my negative thoughts. Science of mind tells us that fear is the negative use of faith. Being afraid of things and worrying about possible bad outcomes is really just using our faith in a negative way. And didn't Job demonstrate that for us in the Bible? He said, the thing I feared has come upon me. Okay, let me come back here. Am I back? Okay. So either way, the whole thing is my faith. In a talk that he gave in 1918, Ernest Holmes said, "You cannot say a word or think a thought that is not omnipotent. That is why you bring upon yourself the thing you fear, and that's also why you bring upon yourself the thing you want." So either way, we are very powerful beings. So I'm sure you get where I'm going with this. We want to tip our faith scale to the good and leave it tipped, right? Now, I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but when I first began studying New Thought principles and learning about using spiritual practice to improve my faith, I used to think that the only way to manifest my good and really use the law was to think positive, God-like thoughts 100% of the time. I thought I had to be consciously aware of my thoughts and beliefs and my affirmations at all times. Now, it didn't take me long to realize that's too hard, way too hard. Now, I don't know who studied this or how they studied this, but apparently the average person thinks somewhere between 10,000 and 60,000 thoughts a day. Of those thousands of thoughts, 80% of those thoughts are negative. And 95% of them are the same thoughts we thought the day before. So that gives me a feel for what is happening with my faith scale, right? It turns out I was very mistaken to think that I had to tip the scale 100% to the good, positive, life-affirming way of thinking. I'd like to introduce you to what I call the 51% rule. Let me share this with you. This is also a quote from Ernest Holmes. So in that same talk he gave, he said, When 51% of your thinking is health and life and power, that day, that 51% will swallow up and erase the other 49%. The day you as an individual, by 51% of thought, pass beyond this perception of limitation, everything in the universe is yours and you become it. The day 51% of your thinking is happy, misery shall depart and never return. Now, that is quite a claim. But these numbers he used intrigue me. It's comforting to me to know that it's at the slight tip of the scale of just 51% that we see a demonstration. Having 51% of my thinking be happy with thoughts of, like he said, life, power, health, those God words, is still challenging. Definitely still challenging. But it's a little bit more within my range of maybe I can actually do this. Now, I said in the beginning that faith is a way of being and a way of operating. But we see that it really means operating from an expectancy of good. Now, I don't know if you guys probably know, Ernest Holmes had a brother, Fenwick Holmes, who also wrote some great books. And he defined faith as a constant expectancy of good. And I've always loved that. Think about living from a constant expectancy of good. Where in your life right now might you be forgetting to have a constant expectancy of good? There are a lot of people right now who are not expecting good things from this upcoming presidential election. Sometimes I am one of them. So I'm going to go there for this because I know some of you are dealing with this as well. We get focused on good outcomes and knowing and trusting this is all part of the divine plan. And then we see a news story or something and we are back to shaking our fist at the sky, right? It's hard. But this is a faith community and we are here to support each other, to affirm and know the truth for each other, to remind each other of our truth because it can be hard. I follow this psychotherapist and author on Twitter. Her name's Carrie Joyce, and she only tweets positive, uplifting, joyful things. And she recently posted this incredible picture. It was a beautiful picture of a sunset over the ocean, and it was very colorful, and it had this lovely ornate font, and it said, "Train your mind to see the good in everything." And someone commented, "These days, that's really hard." And I had to laugh because it's like, it's okay to admit that, that's real life. It can be hard. There are spiritual practices and strategies to help tip our scale in the right direction. And I have just a couple for you today. One is to use your emotions as a guide. It took me a lot of years to figure this out because it's really hard to just sit back and think, gee, what thoughts am I thinking right now? We just don't do that. We're busy thinking. But if I'm angry or sad or depressed or upset about something, that's an emotion that I can recognize and notice. I'm going to feel those emotions and notice it. And then that's telling me that I'm operating on the wrong side of my scale. So that means I'm thinking something that is causing me to be angry, sad, depressed, upset, whatever the emotion is, instead of thinking about my good, instead of thinking about my truth. Now, you still have to honor the feeling. You got to feel the feels. This is definitely not about pretending they're not real or ignoring them, but it's telling me that I have some work to do. Now, some of that work might be using another strategy, which is affirming the opposite, using affirmations, affirming good things about yourself, about others, about the world. I took a class years ago called Mind, Body, Spirit Connection. And one of the textbooks for the class was the little book by Louise Hay. I think it's You Can Heal Your Body, I think is what it's called. And our project for the class was to choose some physical condition that we were dealing with and experiencing and that we wanted to heal. And our homework was to say the positive affirmation that correlated with it, because the book goes through all these different body conditions and issues, and then it gives you an affirmation for it. So our homework was to say the correlating affirmation 100 times a day for a minimum of 30 days, and then write a paper about our outcome. That's a lot, 100 times a day for 30 days. It made a huge impact. So what was cool though is you can't say an affirmation 100 times a day just sitting in one sitting, knocking it out like that. So they had all these suggestions about spreading it out over the day in different ways, like write it down in a journal a few times, go for a walk and chant it as you take your walk, print out the affirmation and tape it all over the place. They had us put it on the bathroom mirror, or so every time you see it, you stop and think that. You read it, you think it. You put it on light switches every time you turn on a light switch. We'd put it on in our car, like on the dashboard. We put it on the top of our computer monitor, all over. So you put it places you would see it, notice it, and be reminded to affirm that truth, to affirm you're good. And the class was life-changing for me because that's when I first realized how much I needed constant reminding. Those affirmation reminders triggered me to remember the truth and helped me to fully expect my good and to tip that faith scale. And that's actually, side note, the intention behind the company I created, Spirit on the Spot. That is their whole point, is creating those products that will trigger us and to remind us to say and think that affirmation. So our good is in and all around us. And the more we seek it, focus on it, expect it, and believe it, the more good we experience. So I'm going to close with this story that happened to me years ago. And it's a true story that really happened. First, I have to tell you that I have always loved personalized license plates. It's kind of weird, just stick with me here. So as a kid, I remember thinking how cool it was that you could have your car say something to the world. I always thought that was really neat, that you could let your car be an expression of you, express a bit of your personality. And if you think about, we're all expressions of God, we could have our car be an expression of us too, right? I always thought it was neat. So I've always paid attention when I see a personalized license plate, when I'm out driving or parking lot or whatever. And when my kids, particularly when they were little, they used to like looking for personalized plates too. It was like a game that we would play. Now, sometimes you can't fit everything you need to say on the license because you only have 7 spots. You have 7 letters or 7 numbers or a combination, and that's all you got. So sometimes you can't fit everything when you're trying to communicate it. So you have to kind of figure out what they're saying. So one time my girls and I were walking in a parking lot and we saw a personalized plate. Now I didn't take a picture of it, but I made a visual for you guys to see what it said. So this is what it said, ITSALGD. Now my oldest, who was about 15 years old at the time, saw it deep in the teenage years, okay? She saw it and said, "Hey, look, Mom, that license plate says it's all good." You got to pick up on the oblivious teenager tone, It's all good. She thought she was hot stuff, So we happened to be in a Center for Spiritual Living parking lot. So I said, "Well, honey, this is a church parking lot. How do you know it doesn't say it's all God?" And she was blown away. She was like, "Oh," and she was determined to go in that church and find out whose car it was and what it said. So I had to stop her. I said, no, it doesn't matter because we're both right. It's all God and it's all good. And when we live in faith, we see that everywhere. So I'm going to leave us there today, knowing it's all God and it's all good.